Welcome to Charts That Count. This week, the U.S. removed China's designation as a currency manipulator. The decision came just a few days before the two superpowers signed a Phase 1 trade deal that put on pause any escalation in the trade war for the time being. So how did we get here? In order to answer that, we have to rewind the clock a few months back to the summer. Now, here's a chart of the exchange rate between the US dollar and China's currency, the renminbi. Now, the y-axis here is inverted because as a dollar fetches more renminbi, it means that the renminbi is weakening. So, as you can see in this chart going back to 2019, the first significant down move in the renminbi versus the dollar was in May. Now, what sparked this was the U.S. threatening tariffs on China. Now, in August, the U.S. made good on that threat. The U.S. slapped additional tariffs on China, and China retaliated. And on August 5th, everything came to a head. The renminbi weakened considerably against the U.S. dollar, and it actually crossed a very important threshold, 7 renminbi per dollar. Now, a few things about China's currency. The first is that it is not free-floating like the dollar or the pound, which tend to be driven by market forces. Instead, China manages the value of its currency, and that means the state steps in to intervene in order to determine a targeted range at which the renminbi fluctuates versus other currencies. Now, it can do this in a few ways. The first is that each day the central bank sets a reference rate around which the renminbi can trade. The second way is that the central bank and China can intervene in foreign exchange markets and either buy or sell dollars depending on where they want the value of the renminbi to go. Now, the second key point about the renminbi is that this 7 renminbi level that I mentioned earlier is very psychologically important in the country. Now, the last time citizens saw a currency weaken past 7 renminbi per dollar was during the global financial crisis. And officials have spent lots of time and lots of money to ensure that hasn't happened since. So when it did in August, it was an incredibly big deal, not least because President Trump had been complaining for a long, long time that China was purposely weakening its currency to gain an unfair trading advantage. Now, later that day, on August 5th, the U.S. responded to the depreciation of China's currency by naming China a currency manipulator. Now, this was surprising for a few reasons. The first is that the U.S. Treasury tends to evaluate its trading partners and their currency practices only twice a year. So in April and October, the Treasury puts out a report that talks about currency manipulation and if the trading partners are doing it. And they outline various criteria for how to determine whether or not that is the case. Some has to do with how much a country is intervening in foreign exchange markets. Others have to do with how much a country is importing or exporting versus its peers. Now, if a country meets 3 of these criteria, they are named a currency manipulator. If they meet just 2 of the criteria, they're put on a monitoring list. Now, China in August only met 1 of their criteria. And even more importantly, currency strategists were saying that China was actually intervening to prop up the currency, meaning to strengthen its value against the dollar, not actually weakening it. See, what was happening when this trade war was swirling around was that there were growing concerns that China's economy was slowing down. And at the same time, the central bank was pumping stimulus into the economy, which has the impact in any economy, let alone in China, of weakening a currency. Taking this all together, any country facing these concerns would have seen a depreciating currency as well. And you can see as some of these pressures abated after the summer, the value of the renminbi actually rises versus that of the dollar. Now, what was driving this was progress on the U.S.-China trade war front. So both sides agreed to no new tariffs. They sat down and agreed in December to sign a Phase 1 trade deal, and the renminbi strengthened as this big looming risk to its economy dissipated somewhat for the time being. Now, here we are in early 2020, and the Treasury has removed this label. But currency strategists say that this whole saga should spook the U.S.'s trading partners. It seems as though anyone is at risk at this point of being named a currency manipulator.